Right, back in the hot seat we are. Or Chris is back in the hot seat. Hopefully I can warm it up a little bit and ask him some challenging questions. Run Fast Podcast, episode 67. As always, we are bring offline about a few things. And Chris was just talking about his few injuries that he's got in a couple of athletes at the moment and how he's looking at doing some intensive hill training over the next few weeks to try and build a little bit more strength and eliminate some of those injuries coming up to some major meets. A bit going on in Australia at the moment in athletics. National championships this weekend, I assume for the Masters athletes, Chris, or all athletes?
We've just had our Australian championships for juniors and our under 20s and open athletes in Perth. So that's the only Mondo track in Australia other than the AIS in Canberra, which the AIS, it's a pretty old weather-beaten track now, but the track in Perth is a very quick track. And a lot of records fell. A lot of age records fell. You know, we had our own sort of Seth Kennedy, he was a high school student here in Queensland, and I've watched his progression from around 55 seconds over the last probably 4 years down to he ran personal best of 46.6.
For a 400 we're talking about here, for people that don't know these times and can't correlate what Chris is talking about there.
Yeah, that's for 400 metres, which is quite amazing. Obviously, the talk of the town is Gout's run. We've watched him. He ran 9.99 twice, all wind assisted, but then banked a 200-metre run at 19.84 seconds. Was wind assisted, but not much, 2.2. I'd have to say that legitimately puts him on the world stage. That is a very, very fast run. And if you watch the run, weirdly, these first 100 metres is fairly lackluster. It's just kind of he's with everyone else. It's his back end. Like his final 100 is far superior to anyone in this country and arguably is up there with the best in the world right now. I would say that now after seeing that run. And it also vindicates my training philosophy, which I always tell all of my athletes, I am a back-end coach. I train back-end. So you can be the best starter in the world, but if you can't finish, you're never going to win races. So I put my energy into back-end training, and so athletes can finish their runs, particularly over 200 metres. My athletes, all my 200-metre runners, they don't fade because we do the work. And when you go back and watch that run, which I have, if you haven't seen it, I can put it up for you if you like.
Yeah, we'll actually have a look at that and we'll talk our way through it. I haven't got to the point of putting these up as videos as yet. It's going to take a little bit more editing skill. I can do it, just takes a bit more time. But I have a couple of questions or lots of questions coming to mind straight away about just back-end training of a 200, and we'll explain a bit more about that in a moment for listeners that may not be that familiar with sprinting. But secondly, you said that his first 100 metres was a bit lackluster or just, staying with the field. That's probably not a bad thing for him. Even this would be my take on it, given the style of a runner that he is, that he's not a hugely powerful runner. So it might have been a better way for him to run that race to make sure he's still getting out. Obviously, if anyone's ever run a 200, you still know you have to get out pretty hard. But you can just, for those runners that have very good back ends, they can just turn off just that little bit. I was kind of the opposite as a sprinter. I had no back end, so I had to really just go hell for leather the first 200, and hopefully I could first 100 and hope to hang on. So that's probably not a bad run for him doing that. Where does that put him in world times at the moment with that 1984 you said he ran?
Yeah, it would be a world lead if it was legal. It'd be the fastest in the world.
This year?
Yeah.
Yeah, wow. That's pretty impressive running.
It's a dead year
for
athletics. So this is a nothing year. So all the really talented 200-metre runners are not running quick. Even Latisse Bogo came out the other day and ran 20.2. But he's in a different stage of his.
Of course,
these guys are people that are going to be getting ready for world champs next year. So none of them are running fast.
Yeah, they're probably in the middle of a big endurance block and, a lot of dead legs and so forth. But still, what's going to be interesting is when he is in one of those races with, the better athletes all around the world, And then athletes often go two ways. They obviously they tie up a lot because they're trying to chase so much, or they actually get dragged along and actually run better, right? So you can be one or both of those athletes. So, yeah.
And we won't know. I mean, our best 100-meter runner, Tori Lewis, went over to a Diamond League in an off year and raced a lot of really quality athletes and won in 20.8 seconds.
Mm.
Beat the likes of Sha'Carri Richardson and, the Gabby Thomas as well and all these people. And everyone said, oh, my God, she's won a Diamond League. She's beat all these runners. That's all fine. But then when all these runners tuned up for competition, they're all running 21.8.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And she's just not in the ball game. So you've got to be very measured when you start making comments about who wins a race. Because when you run a Diamond League, you're running for time. Like when you go to the Olympic Games, you run for medals.
Yeah.
World Championship, time's not relevant. You get a World Championship medal, you got it for life. The times, it's always great to run fast times. I get it. But, Lockie Kennedy, who went and got a silver medal at World Indoors, he's got a silver medal at World Indoors. He only ran 6.50. All the best 60-meter runners weren't there.
Yeah, yeah.
But you're still going to take the medal. I mean, he can only beat who turns up.
Yeah, that's so true.
So it's a silver medal at world level. So that's what you run for. The case in point, and if I was Gout right now and his manager in a dead year, I'd be throwing him into Europe into Diamond Leagues when no one's running well.
Mm.
Get some wins on the board at that level and rake the sponsorship dollars in while he's the standout runner in a dead year.
Yeah.
And then see what he can do, And
also, I think that part of it is getting used to the travel and preparing in other countries, right? And when you're moving between countries and it's a very different sort of game where you traveling and training, as we know you've traveled overseas and you know how hard that is to travel and race
from this country.
From Australia, it's extremely difficult. But even just domestically, when you're moving around within Australia from state to state because of our distances, you're in a different bed. You're not getting the normal food, blah blah blah. So just that alone, I think, is really important to get under your belt. And it's interesting that talking about you can only beat who turned up on the day. Just always reminds me when that sort of quote comes up about and his name just escapes me. Who was the speed skater, the Australian speed skater that actually won the gold medal? Steve Bradbury.
Stephen Bradbury. Yeah. Which does I lost a friendship over this. I lost a friendship because this woman said to me, and by the way, she knows nothing about sport, mind you. She put up all these posts about what a great skater Stephen Bradbury was and that gold medal. And I joined her, I said, give me a break. I said, don't you tell me that his strategy was to run last with the view that everyone would fall over and he would cross the line. That was his strategy. I said it was just dumb luck. That's all it was. Yes, I'll give it to him. He made an Olympic final. Good on him. But there's no way in the world. That is the Darwin Award for gold medals and always will go down as that award. He just got lucky.
I agree. And look, we know in sport, a lot of athletes have got lucky. It just takes a bit of the luck in particular sports to actually win these medals. But going back to your point, he had to make the final, right? That would never have happened for him if he didn't actually make that final.
Yeah. And I'm not going to knock the bloke. If I was him and I was in a Olympic final of anything, and luck went my way and I got a gold medal, I'd take it all day long. Yeah, but would I be running around town saying I'm the greatest? I wouldn't be doing that. If I made in a 400-meter Olympic final and ran last with 100 to go with the view that I was hoping everyone would pull a hamstring and I'd win, if that was my race strategy, and then it happened, magically happened, I would not stand on that podium and go, I'm the greatest 400-meter runner in the world. I would not say it. I would just go, you know what, I'll take it, but it's pretty embarrassing.
Yeah, there's lots of situations with those sort of things. It's, if we go back to track, I mean, the Americans have been beat in the relay many times, like fumbling the baton, right? They're the fastest relay team in the world, but they just can't get a baton around the track. But anyway, we digress. Let's just talk about this Australian meet over in Perth. And also just, you made a comment before, we might just dive into that a bit more about training the back end of your 200. And just maybe highlight some of the stuff that you focus a little bit more on for people that don't fully understand what we're talking about there, what that actually means.
And here's the other thing that people always, and this is the funny thing, and this is the way our brains seem to be wired now with the way our lives are structured. But when people, I'm getting this a lot, particularly with younger people, say to me, just give me the answer. What's the solution? Like, how do I get really fast over 200 meters? Well, just give me the answer. I don't want progression. I don't want a long answer. I don't want 20 things. Give me one or two things. And I thought about this recently. I thought, if I could only choose two things to make me a really competitive, tough 200-meter runner, what would they be? And there is two things. And one is hills, but very specific hills and to a very specific time. So roughly about 150-meter hill and done a certain way. And I'll come back to that in a minute. But the second thing that I've tested, and it's true, and it happens for me with everyone I work with, is that you need to stiffen up and get really good at 250-meter reps. When you get good at 250 meters and get sharp, and I do this as a psychological thing as well, because I do this with a lot of my 200-meter runners, I get them good at 250 meters. Then what happens is I tell them to do all their warm-ups in that back straight near the 250-meter mark. And then when they get called to marshal, they walk 50 meters closer to their finishing goal. So mentally, they know this is not 250 meters. I've been doing so much 250-meter work. Now I've only got to run 200. And I feel great. I can attack this bend and I'm not scared about fading. I'm going to attack it and I'm going to reinvest in the race as soon as I turn for home, and no one can touch me because I will not fade, because I feel confident, I'm strong. I've been bashing out my 250s. I believe it's a really good marker, the 250 time, of what you'll run in a 200 if you get good at it.
Yeah.
So they're the two things I say: be a strong hill runner and get good at your 250s, and you will be a good 200-meter runner. Now, people will argue that point because they'll say, oh, Chris, you don't do speed, or you're not doing enough raw speed, or 20, 30, 40, 50-meter explosive work. And I'll go, yep, but they don't get injured either.
Yeah. Yeah, look, I think there's, and we know this, that, everyone's a little bit different. You can actually put two people on different programs, and based on their slightly different, physiological differences, they'll get to the same pointy end. But I would agree with that, and I think there's a lot of psychology around running a 200, and it can feel like a long way sometimes. So knowing that you're, running, as you said, 50 meters short when you're doing a lot of 250s, but I think a 250 is a very good distance for 200-meter runners as well. I think if you're a more speed-based 200-meter runner, then a 300 can feel a little bit daunting, and you won't attack the start of it enough. So with a 250, it kind of feels like, well, you've only got 50 meters and you're back into your sort of, your 200 area. But with a 300, you've got to run that first 100, and people just don't attack that enough when they're running 3. So, yeah, I agree with that. It's a bit of a strategy. And look, we've both always been big advocates of hill running. I think that does give you, mental toughness. Some of our hill sessions we've done over the years, they are absolutely grueling. And I think hills are one of those sessions that when you're doing with a few sort of mates and just getting stuck in them, they're fantastic. But they do build that strength, as you start to fatigue in those hills, that just that bit of a slant you've got to run up, they build a lot of strength for you for sure.
And confidence, 200-meter runners need to have confidence. As a 100-meter runner, you can kind of get away with it a bit. But in 200s, if you're not confident, you're going to get found out. There's nowhere to hide in a 200. If you haven't done the work, you get found out. Same as 4s. But from a 4 runner coming down to 200, they're not scared of 250, 300 work, a 400-meter runner. A 100-meter runner gets very frightened by 250s and 300. That's a scary distance. It's so much over distance for them, and it hurts. But a 400-meter run, you tell a 400-meter runner that they've got a 250 day, they get a bit excited. They're like, oh, yeah, 250, that's 150 meters short of a 4. I'm in a good place.
Yeah,
I love 250 work. As a 4 runner, I would embrace 250 work. I get kind of annoyed if I go to training and I have to do 40, 50 or 60-meter work.
Yeah.
Because I just don't like it. It doesn't do my body any good. I don't feel the same benefits and it frightens me because of potential injury.
Yeah.
So I shy away from it. And my latest runner who broke 2 Australian records over the weekend, I didn't want her to run the 200. I know she can run a good 200, but I didn't want her to do it because I know what it does. And then sure enough, hamstring strain.
Yeah.
And it just does my head in. She's a 4 runner going down to 200, not a speed runner going up to it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what happened. She's big, she's powerful, she's strong. She attacked it because she has no fear, but her body didn't respond the way we wanted it to. And now we've got to fix it. So I'm very, very tempted to walk away from the 200 altogether and just stick to her events, which is 4.8.
Yeah. Yeah, the twos, I suppose for something like that, it is quite a big step up in speed. Whereabouts did she break down in the 200?
Well, her mechanics, this is the craziness of it. We spend a lot of time in mechanics with her. When she runs 4 rhythm, her mechanics are arguably, and I've got her on slow motion video, virtually you can't fault them.
Mm-hmm.
As soon as she goes to power, she starts overstriding and throws the foot out and overstrides and gets really upright. And as soon as that happens, her hamstring loads, and then the eventual strain is too much. And and I've found it really difficult in speed work with her to cure this overstride problem. So I've sat her on hill work and more of that to get her hips in the right place. And for 4.8, fine, no problem. But we haven't been able to solve it when it comes to speed. And then after a while, if you are going to be injury prone in that area, you've got to make a decision. Well, where do you sit? Do we take the risks and try and fix it? Or do we stick to the events that she's actually really good at? Over 200, she still probably wouldn't, she might have medaled, but she wouldn't have won it.
Yeah.
But she's winning the 400 and she's setting Australian records over 4.8. So where do you get your bang for buck? Where do you want to sit? What does your career look like? So I'm more inclined to sit her there and leave that raw speed alone. Just leave it alone. We could spend a lot of time trying to fix it, but to what end?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and they're the decisions that you have to make with your athlete, right? The coach needs to sit down and have that conversation and find out, what makes them tick for a start. Do they want to, sit in this space running the twos? My 2 cents worth just hearing you, and then she starts to overstride in that distance. It sounds like that it's one of those classics where people think to run faster, they start to overstride. They think that's where they're going to get the extra speed from. They don't actually think about the leg turnover. Yeah. So it might even be for someone like that, she needs to go down to some shorter stuff at training, not super short, but, 60s, 80s, whatever, and just practice that leg turnover.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people, it's often you get the opposite where your speed athletes, when they go up the distance, they overstride for a 400 because they know they can't run that fast. Their leg turnover the 400 because they get so tired. But for someone like her, it sounds like that overstriding comes from that mental connection that she has, thinking that you've got to actually take a longer stride to actually go faster.
Yeah.
But you're right. If you can't correct that and it is a risk, sometimes you're just better off sticking to what she's very good at. So, yeah.
And you also got to ask yourself, how much time are we going to bank and lose on correction for an event that's not your event? And then again, on the other hand, I had a 25-year-old sprinter last night. We're on the track and I've had to slow her down to get her to go faster later. And in a nutshell, and this is the words that I said to her last night, I said, I love you at 14 seconds. You look great and mechanically perfect. I hate you at 13. Everything changes at 13 seconds and it goes wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we're trying to correct. But the problem is 100 metres is her event. Yeah. That's the problem. So we've got it. We don't have a choice. We have to spend the time correcting it.
Yeah, sure.
Because otherwise she's not going to get any faster and she'll just get hamstring strains. And so it's the same problem, by the way, if you look at Michael Johnson's history and his history with Clyde Hart. He was getting hamstring strain after hamstring strain. They spent, I think it was the best part of 4 years, correcting his mechanics to get rid of these hamstring strains. That's why he runs like he runs.
Yeah.
That's what they had to do to get rid of it because he was constantly getting hamstring strains. And you can read this in Clyde Hart's notes and Michael Johnson's biography on that journey that he took and trying to get rid of that. But his event was 200 metres. So they had to cure it. Even though he was a good 400 metre runner, they had to spend the time curing it because He was a world record holder for nearly a decade, over 200. So it was his event.
This is the art part of coaching, though.
Correct.
This is where the science goes out the door, and this
And the
is
art
where,
comes in.
yeah, 100%. And it's the coach's job to, with the athlete, to work out that puzzle, right? And it's just like a big jigsaw or a Rubik's Cube. You've got to put this puzzle together for the individual athlete.
It is.
And that's where, if you want to really improve, and we've spoken about this, and we spoke last week about, potentially launching our online training program soon. But if you really want to get to a particular level in some of the athletes that you're coaching, you really need that one-on-one coaching experience from someone who's got a lot of experience behind them to actually start putting that puzzle together, which just takes, years of experience.
Well, I always say this, and the science is always going to be the science, So if you tell someone they want to be if someone tells you and you're a coach that they want to be a 400-meter runner and they can't get to the 200-meter mark in some kind of level of comfort at a reasonable speed, then the science is they'll never be a 400-meter runner. That's the science. That said, you can take someone who says they on the exactly same athlete and all this with the same language, and if you can, and then the art becomes, is it possible to develop someone to get to the 200-meter mark at a level of comfort and continue on and run a decent time? Then you start saying, well, how do we put this puzzle together? And in so many instances, and I've had this happen a few times in my career, I've just said, it's just not for you. You're just not going to be a 400-meter runner. I cannot get you to the 200-meter mark at any level of comfort and have you continue on. It's not for you. And on the other hand, and then there's people that are getting, you just know, you look at them and go, you know what? I can see we can do this. Then we've just got to approach it in a certain way to get you to this point, but you're going to get there. We know you're going to get there. So it's just there's a few trial and error things that we do based on individual athletes, but we know they're going to make it. So, and it's the wisdom to know what sessions to give people and how to construct that and what ones to take out and say, that's not for you.
For sure.
And I'll give you the classic example of it was you training Mike and you training me and saying, well, Chris sits in this space. He needs this session. This brings him on, but it doesn't work for Mike. He sits in this space and it brings him on. And we ran very similar 400 meters.
Very, yeah.
And you've got to have that wisdom though, to know, because the dumb coach, what I don't call a coach, then I call them trainers, puts them all both in the same program and hopes that they do well. That doesn't translate.
Yeah, I had the best experience for me was when coaching Anthony, and he was stuck running 11.1 for so long because he was just doing too much longer volume work that didn't really suit him. And he ran a good 200, by the way.
He did, yeah. He could run a good 150 too.
Yeah, very good 150. But, when I just tweaked some of his training and we really focused on his physiology type and training for his size, I suppose, he ran his best at around 95, 96 kilos.
Yeah, phenomenal.
That he went down to running 10.8. We pulled 0.3 of a second out of him where he thought he was at his peak and he was never going to go under that 11-second mark. So, yeah, you're 100% right. You've just got to make these individual changes with the individual athlete. All good. Well, we might actually leave it there. We've gone past. We're trying to keep these a bit short and sweet. We didn't get around to speaking about the Perth, but we might actually save that one for next time and actually break down a couple of videos of Gout and some of the other runs there. But so people can actually get through a whole episode. We're at 25 minutes at the moment.
Yep.
Anyone that wants to sign up to the newsletter, it's runfasthq.com. Well, that's our landing page. That'll get you to the newsletter as well. And I'll put a link in our latest article as well, which Chris wrote the other week about ankle stiffness and the impact on speed and why you need it for speed. So I'll put a link in the show notes for that. Until then, that's probably about it for us. And we'll wrap up there and we'll see you next time.
Awesome. All right. Cheers.
Thanks, mate. Ciao.